Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Lee Wind. I'm the Chief Content Officer for the Independent Book Publishers Association, and I want to welcome you to this webinar on the mechanics of distribution and forming publisher-owned distribution cooperatives. Special shout out to the community of Literary Magazine and Presses members who are joining us, as well as members of PubWest. And of course, if we have publishers who were distributed by SPD, and you're trying to figure out your next step with distribution, you are also especially welcome. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to ask Joe to, I'm passing the mic to Joe.
Oh, why, thank you. I am going to get right to it. So because we have a lot of information today, so for better or worse, we're going right into the nitty-gritty. So I assume that, like most of you, I founded my press, Microcosm Publishing, in my bedroom in 1996 with 0 books, 0 distribution, and 0 idea about what I was doing. I had no idea how to run a press. And when we had published 5 books, I submitted us to Small Press Distribution, SPD. I was summarily rejected on the grounds that there was no market for our books. That is the actual letter that they sent, and I still have it because this was a very important day in my career. It was the day that I had my oh yeah moment, where I was highly motivated because they said there was no market for our books, and I did not agree with that premise on the whole. So I began building a movement. I went door to door. I showed people the value proposition of our books. And I really wanted to show that like people did care and were interested. We signed with National Book Network, which is another distributor, in 2002. But they didn't grow our sales at all. So we left them within 2 more years. And we tried we tried all of the other distributors. Some were better than others, but we realized that we had always been sort of best on our own. And we left and our last distributor in 2018, and our sales on older titles more than doubled in 2019, meaning books that had been in print before were selling twice as many as they had been under our management of those systems. So between returning to self-distributing and today, our sales increased 589% by not having a distributor. And we had to buy 2 additional warehouses to contain all of our newfound capacity. It was really an important detail here is this was not the plan. The plan, which seemed very ambitious at the time, is that we were simply trying to maintain our capacity and escape endless bureaucracy in favor of efficiency. Essentially, like, we had more fun making books, so we just didn't want to do paperwork all day long. And so that seemed really, really complicated when we went on that mission. And I talked to all of my mentors, and I really like dug out every inch of information I could find anywhere, because, as I'm sure everybody else maybe feels, distribution felt very, very complicated, like it was behind a curtain, like nobody actually knew what that meant. And so imagine my shock when I found that what you need to distribute books is actually very, very simple. And so we're going to break that down into 9 very simple steps. What you need for distribution. A staffed warehouse, which, could be your bedroom, your basement, your garage. You can subcontract a facility, or, it can be a trade distributor. What was right for us isn't necessarily what's right for everybody. This was an office that we had 20 some years ago that we also used as our facility for mail order. And you'd need, a way to integrate your fulfillment system. In technical terms, this is what's called an ERP, but that sounds really boring. Some people manage this literally with a clipboard. Some people will use like website software. It's basically a way that turns an order into a shipment, into an invoice, and keeps all of your records. And we built a system called WorkingLit, which is a piece of software that does all of this for us. And so that was essentially our way of solving this problem, because when we went into this in 2001, there wasn't anything like that. So, we built it and now we share it with other publishers. If you use it for fewer than 5 titles, it's free and it manages all aspects of your operation. So, and that is my former assistant who now, this was a typical look he would have when walking through the warehouse. And so similarly, you need an Onyx feed, which is how the information about your books gets to major accounts. So essentially, this is how bookstores put your books into their computers to know that they exist and when they're published, and what the cover looks like and who, what the description reads like and things like that. We also built that into the same software, and for the exact same reason. We needed to solve this problem ourselves, and then over time we figured we should help other people solve that problem. And that, I should say this is actually a more complicated aspect, because typically a software that does these sort of things is, you would spend 5 figures a year at minimum. So that was the other reason that it was important for us to make it accessible for anybody. Marketing presence at trade shows is really something that I didn't do until we went independent. We really left that to our distributor. That was part of the problem. And you can see Ruby, my service dog, over my shoulder there. An important presence at trade shows. And that's basically where booksellers, they walk the room, they discover new things. They're like, oh, this is cool. I've never seen this before. Or, you can talk to them about various things. It's essentially like discoverability. I joke that it's because people don't have time to actually read their emails that you have to have trade shows. So, but there's trade shows of all kinds. There's regional shows. So you'll have one that's like the Midwest, or you'll have one that's New England, or you have one that's gift, or you have one, or it'll be like segmentation by that sort of thing. But so there's all kinds of different ways where that's divided. And next you have your telesales and field sales force. And, just like your warehouse can be your bedroom, this can be like you on the telephone, or your buddy, or, any number of things. You can hire commissioned sales reps where they take a percentage of each invoice. That's what big and small publishers do. But you don't have to do that either. You could just, have that be something that you handle yourself. Or, sometimes people don't even go that far. They leave it to the discoverability efforts, and then people order on their website. Speaking of, Edelweiss is what is like the industry's standard catalog. So it's the digital version of what used to be thousands of mailed paper catalogs. And in theory, this is where booksellers could discover books they don't know about. This is something that is somewhat ethereal, because search tools on Edelweiss are somewhat lacking, but it does happen that publishers browse catalogs by publisher and write orders that way, just like they would in the old days, where they would, cut out the mail order form in the back and mail it in. But this is important because this is industry standard. So this is sort of where booksellers look for books. And then, but that does cost, and that costs monthly. So, we'll revisit these things a little bit. So, more typically, accounts with wholesalers is something that most publishers have, but as we will see with our other presenters, not all. So wholesalers are people who usually fulfill an order that when the book is a little bit older, when the store is restocking on a title, or when a library is wanting to order a book from your catalog, they're not going to write you a letter and order one book. Usually they're going to write it into their existing orders, and they're going to want all of those books to come together. So they're going to assume that you are available through places like Baker and Taylor, Ingram, Bookazine, New Leaf, etc., Follett, depending on what you publish. And there's various smaller library jobbers, which are companies that, fulfill those smaller sales or educational sales. There are an seemingly infinite number of wholesalers depending on the kind of publishing that you do. So, maybe figuring out the relevant ones for what you do. Meaningful ways to market your books to readers is actually the thing where most people fall down. That's the part that big publishers, more than anybody, neglect this aspect because they just think, oh, okay, I've thoroughly marketed the book to bookstores. I've gotten all these blurbs and, these key reviews. They forgot to actually make people excited to read the book because they're trying to outsource that to the bookstores to promote the books to their customers. Whereas, really this is how you can stand out the most, believe it or not, is really to just have cool ways of connecting the value proposition of the books that you publish to what people are getting out of it, who are the people reading your books, So like, who is it for? Why do they care? What will make them understand how much they would love it, And and here's some more. This is marketing adjacent publicity, and this is a display in a Washington State bookseller where they keep rotating 8 of our titles on display, which is really, really touching. And then methods to get paid for invoices. This is something that, is sort of non-negotiable, or you can try to make it negotiable, but essentially what happens then is, your books aren't necessarily getting paid for because even many well-intentioned people aren't necessarily organized. So, for our first 10 years, we would send out the orders and then, we kept records of who was and wasn't paid, but, we didn't really chase them down. And, sometimes we would send like 3 or 4 orders for somebody that hadn't paid all their invoices, and it catches up with you. So you need a way to like be organized, to know what's what, but really that's it. That's all that is involved in distribution. It's those 9 things. It's very simple. We're going to revisit them a little bit. And so usually the very first question that somebody offers after that point is, can I remove some of those steps? Do I need to do all of those things? And, it's actually pretty simple. Yes, the world is your oyster. You can do whatever you want. And you should, necessarily that's a big aspect. You don't need to replicate the work of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and you probably can't, and you would probably be pretty exhausted if you tried because a lot of the things that they do aren't going to really work for you, be in your best interest. The things that make sense for them don't necessarily make sense for you, and honestly, like we reviewed here, doing distribution wrong worked better for us than doing distribution correctly. So, take from that what you will, but the most important thing is that one size does not fit all. You're essentially building your own custom solution. And when I was starting out, I had no idea what I was doing, and it worked because at its core, again, it's connecting the value proposition of the book to what it can offer the reader, and then the rest of the details are adjustable. So, go from there. And so tragically, we all know that SPD recently closed their doors. And I think it's an important detail here is the SPD didn't do half of the aspects of distribution. So, you could have a leg up sort of right away by filling in some of those gaps that weren't necessarily being handled. And but a lot of these things, you can really approach this any which way that works for you. So again, SPD didn't have a presence on Edelweiss. They had their own website. They focused more on major accounts, so they weren't, in theory, the books were available, but they weren't necessarily putting their bookseller data into all stores. So, you were running into those kind of issues. And so the data would be really spotty. But the bigger gap here is that they didn't have telesales or field reps. So while they would have a marketing presence at some of the trade shows, I remember I particularly saw them at the Pacific Northwest show, and you could write an order with them there. They didn't have, salespeople that would come visit your store. They didn't have salespeople that would call on your store. And, that's okay. But, this is an area where maybe, this could feel like an area where improvement could be gotten by those publishers. And, it's not necessarily their job, but, they were selling marketing services, but the publishers ultimately are the ones responsible for filling in that gap, So they were working on more of a baseline fulfillment model where they had a warehouse, they had fulfillment software and systems, they had, accounts with they worked with Amazon and Ingram and places like that, and they had a way to get paid, and that was sort of their model. But that's cutting out a lot of the discoverability and what leads to the effectiveness of a distribution relationship, or what most people would think of as what we now call like a full service distributor. So, ponder that and look at the different things, that you could remove variously. You don't need to have an Onyx feed. We didn't have one for our first 6 years, and we're still here. We didn't have a presence at trade shows really until 2019, and that wasn't great. But you look at what things like that cost, and sometimes it's better not to do everything. We didn't work with people like Ingram for our first 6 years. And because of that, some of those books weren't always available or seen as having demand in certain places, but the books were being found by the people that loved them, and they were going to good homes. And so it wasn't really necessarily a problem. We always had some semblance of a sales force, whether that was me trying to schedule appointments and knocking on doors, or whether that was a more traditional force, whereas now we have commissioned sales reps that service 48 states, and that's great, but it's a different thing depending on what you're doing and what you want to get out of it, and honestly, a lot of this stuff is risk and reward. It's costs and consequences. So it's like, you might want to be global, everything for all people, but that might be something to grow into, or maybe you just realize that you can't realistically afford to do that yet, or maybe that's not even what you want, And I really, the thing that really always I resented was this idea that there's a one size fits all model. So, and this is something that I've always really appreciated about the IBPA, is that they come at it from the other way of like, we're trying to go over here. We want the best roadmap. We're not looking to do it in the prescribed method. We're looking at where we're going more than that. And so next, we're going to be looking at a distribution co-op and how that might work. And so honestly, it's sort of the same thing. It's how can these jobs be broken down? The way I think about it is, you have a network and you would want thematically and ideologically compatible publishers that you trust, and you would form a group. And, and the reason that that's important is a couple of reasons. First of all, if one of you is publishing animal photography books and one of you is publishing, books about Asia and one of you is, publishing children's educational books, the books don't sell well together. They would you wouldn't be able to benefit from scale. So what you would want to do is find people that are generally compatible publishers in terms of what they're publishing and like ideologically. Like you want people that think like you think, have similar political goals, aspirations, like if one of you is very, very ambitious and one of you is not at all ambitious, that might be okay, but at some point there's going to be sort of a rub. And, obviously like you want to work with people that you trust. And so you would own the means of production together, meaning the big problem with SPD is that it was a third-party company that could go out of business and it didn't have financial responsibility to anybody because it was over here. And when it ceased to exist, it ceased to exist. Whereas in this case, you would own your own distributor. You would be your own distributor. And, that's obvious in the lessons of this past year, what that means and the stakes for, every one of those publishers, maybe more than any of the rest of us. But the other major advantage here is that when you work with a distributor and it's a third party, you say, hey, can we try this? And they say, oh, it doesn't really work like that. Or no, or most likely, here's some paperwork for you to fill out. And you say, oh, hey, I just wanted to check in about how that thing is going that I asked about. And they say, oh, really busy today. And whereas when you operate and own the means of production, you set the priorities, you can, build your own future and you can learn from your mistakes and you can pivot a lot faster than these more entrenched larger companies can. And that was always the thing that impressed me the most, that when we worked with these companies, it was often years to move into a planned transition, whereas we can often do something literally the same or the next day. And then you can divide the work based on strengths, and then looking at like where people are privileged, where people are skilled, where people are motivated. Maybe one person is an introvert, so you probably wouldn't want them to be your salesperson, but maybe they really like packing orders. Our introverts love doing that. And similarly, maybe one person is very organized. You would probably want them to handle receivables. You would probably want them to handle logistics, And so that's the other thing where you can like really play to your strengths of working together as a group and benefit from that on the whole. And step 4 is the most important step, which is victory. But again, this is how you define it, what you want out of it. It's not somebody else's paradigm because you're the one building where you want to go. And so a lot of this stuff, it's hard to really put this in ethereal enough terms, Again, it was very hard for me to understand that this is something that we could do ourselves and that this is something that was possible at all. And if I didn't have people that I could reach out to and say, how do you handle Onyx? Can you send me all the Onyx codes? Can you tell me how this aspect would be handled? Or, I would send them my list and I would say, what am I forgetting? And they would come back to me and be like, no, this is actually really thorough. And so that's sort of you can do these things. And I've heard this attitude over and over and over about how you need a distributor and how lucky publishers were to have SPD. But I really think based on all of the information that if somebody was motivated and wanted to open, this can of worms and understand all these logistics, I really think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity there, and you could actually start with a leg up from where you stopped with SPD. And I think a lot of the publishers that are going to present about what they're doing today have even more to say about that. So we're going to not get too hung up on that detail, but, you know, formulate your thoughts and questions. All right.
Cool. So, Joe, you're going to turn your slides off or stop sharing?
Yes. As soon
That
as I
was
can get it to do it.
amazing. Mind's blown. Very exciting. All right. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hop in, but please, I think you're going to pass it to Suhani and Ambika.
Hi, everyone.
Of course.
Go ahead,
Go ahead.
You...
Okay, no, we're just really excited to be part of this conversation today, especially given our history of coming together as publishers and working together. I know that we've gained so much clarity, and we feel even more empowered once we started working together. So I founded Modern Marigold Books in 2019. Ambika founded Yali Books back in 2014, and we, when we met each other, we realized we were doing pretty much the same thing. And so now we came together. We launched Sambasivan and Parikh as of this year, bringing Yali Books and Modern Marigold Books underneath that parent company as its first imprints. We are a small children's book press. We have around 22 titles, and so we're very, very proud of the work that we do. So Ambika, do you want to kick it off with our different approaches to distribution?
So we had different paths to distribution, and I think it's very interesting when we came together how much we learned from each other. And I have to say that a long time ago, I discovered Joe Biel's book, and then I downloaded every Excel template that he had available for free. And I love numbers, so we worked through the numbers, and I think that was one of the key learning stages for us. So when we started looking at margins, we started looking at how we should price, how much we're giving to the distributor, how much it would actually cost us to warehouse and do it ourselves. We ran so many spreadsheets. And what we realized is that once you do that, you have such a clear understanding of how much it really takes to distribute your books. And I think that's really critical. You really need to understand the margins for each unit that you're selling. And once you do that, I think it made a lot of sense in our head. We could do this on our own. We could do many aspects on our own and do it more economically than if we were to hand over this business to someone else. That was one aspect.
Yep, and we both had very different approaches to distribution as well. So Ambika approached her publishing company with POD, and so and we saw, and because I already had books printed by the time I started as an author publisher. So by the time I transitioned to being a traditional publisher, I already had books printed, which I had done offset, and so it was sort of a shoe-in for working with a traditional distributor, and that's who I ended up finding someone to work with, which was really great in the beginning. But then we discovered all these pitfalls. So with POD, we were faced with this really unavoidable high product cost. And so, and then also, you don't have control over the orders that come in. They just come in, they get fulfilled right away. And so you are faced with those couple of challenges that can really backfire too, especially when you have orders coming in that you have no say over whether or not they're printed. And then with traditional distribution, we had zero control over the orders that were coming in and the returns that, were being processed from them. And then we weren't able to focus on specific markets, which was, as we learned more and more about the specific markets that we wanted to serve with our catalog of children's books and where they really fit, it was really frustrating not to be able to really hone in on those markets. And then there was a really high retention that was kept, a 50% retention that was kept, that really limited our growth. And so really these foundational things really helped us understand that, okay, we need to find a system that works better for us and more in our favor, and that can help us grow and scale down the line. So I think we ultimately were led to where we are today, which we're still trying to figure all the pieces out, and we're still trying to see how it plays out down the line, but really building these strong strategic partnerships with wholesalers that is going to allow us to focus on the markets that are really key to us in our catalog, and that's going to allow us to grow within those specific markets.
And the other thing I'd say is that we're really scrappy with the system. So we really tried to build very low-key, simple systems that we could work with. So the lot of steps that Joe outlined, we were able to quickly build them off what is available on the market. We rarely pay a lot of money for them. So we keep an eye on the costs.
And yeah, in general, we're very excited about this whole conversation because especially as our distribution approach plays out, we really hope that it kind of plays out the way that we have in our minds. And we're really excited to see what partnerships can, and what like these cooperatives and different collaborations with other small publishers and author publishers, how, what opportunities come forth in the future.
I have two questions for you. Would you be open to working with other publishers? And relatedly, how are you selling your books in? Like, where are you making your books available now?
I think we can answer the first one before we go to the second one. So we're really focused on the school and school library market. That is our primary market that we're looking at. So we're building relationships with wholesalers that are really focused on those markets. So that's Follett Content Solutions, there's Mackin, there's Overdrive. We're trying to get in to work with Brodart and so on. So these are very specific wholesalers for the school market. So that's the answer to the first question. The second question, we're really excited because I think now we can see a path as to what a cooperative might look like, and we're very excited to explore the possibilities.
Since we're on the two of you, there was a question in the chat about how did you find each other, and like how did you define that you were doing the same things? Like how niche can you articulate your niche that you feel like you both are hitting the same interest level or audience?
Yeah. So the imprints, our company is actually focused on slightly different things, but we were in the same realm. So Ambika's focus was always on showcasing South Asian cultures through the children's books she published. And it was all about, for me, the social emotional learning through identity for the books that I published. And since I started out with my own experiences, I was with the South Asian lens. And so Ambika one time posted a question through a WhatsApp group community that she had founded way back when, which has grown so much since. And it's called South Asian Kidlit. And she basically was like, has anyone ever looked for like a partner to work with? And I immediately texted her when I saw that. I was like, I would love to talk about this with you. Because I had already seen her work. I so admired what she was doing. She was already, when I even thought about publishing, when I started looking at the other publishers out there, Yali Books was the first one that I was like, I want my books to kind of be in this space. And I love the work she did. And so I think from our first conversation, we were like, wait, we are targeting the same market. We are creating children's books. We see a really great connect with in this space of education. We want it to resonate with children, with teachers, educators. And so we kind of saw a really good fit. Like each imprint had its own identity, but they worked well together when we saw them side by side. Ambika, anything to add?
I think essentially, in summary, we are centering diasporic narratives in children's literature. So that's our quick summary of what we're doing.
Yes.
Cool. I'm just keeping an eye on the time. Should we pass the mic to Marc?
Yes. Sure.
Hi. I realized I was not muted. Hopefully I was being quiet enough. I'm going to share my screen real quick. And so I'm going to talk really quickly about, so Half Letter Press is an outgrowth of the group Temporary Services that myself with Brett Bloom and others started in 1998. That gave, publishing has been a part of our practice since the very beginning. We approach our work as artist publishers or publisher artists, and made publications for all kinds of projects and exhibitions. Often we're collaborating with other people and felt the need to formalize this so that we could deal with the boring things in life like paying income taxes. In 2008, as a separate business called Half Letter Press, still run by the same people. Additionally, I publish under the name Public Collectors, and then Brett publishes separately under the name Breakdown Press, established in 2014. So we have two people administrating 4 different presses. This is a quick selection of publications by Temporary Services. Half Letter Press occasionally publishes our own work, also publishes work by other authors. So some aspects of how we deal with distribution. When Temporary Services started, we would just give all of our publications away at the exhibits that they were created for. Very, very slowly, we started working with stores, participating in zine fests, art book fairs, things like that. There's been just an explosion of art book fairs over the last 15 years or so, which tend to be fairs where the people at the table are often the author, are frequently the publisher, and the author. And participating in those events has really helped us expand our community and meet other people with shared interests and values all over the world who often become collaborators. Some aspects of our distribution. Last year, about 60% of our sales were through our own web store, halfletterpress.com. Maybe about 25% of the books we sold were through stores. Some, like Microcosm or like Printed Matter, also redistribute our titles to other stores. So they take maybe a larger percentage in order to offer a wholesale discount to stores that buy the books from them rather than directly through us. And then maybe another 15% were sold through attending events like New York Art Book Fair, Chicago Zine Fest, other art book fairs, sometimes internationally. We generally, we don't sign exclusive distribution agreements with distributors. We never worked with SPD. We don't work with people like DAP. We did recently begin working with a UK and EU distributor called New Dimension. But otherwise, stores and libraries generally buy our work at wholesale directly through us. We create wholesale accounts for them. The scale of our operation, I mean, we usually print 500 to 1,000 copies of most publications. We don't ever make anything print on demand. We do sell PDF versions of some books. Sometimes if things are popular, like this book, Prisoner's Inventions, we'll reprint it. This was originally released by a different publisher that ceased publishing. There was a long gap, and then we got it back into print. It's a collaboration with a late friend who was incarcerated, where we invited him to write about and draw different things he'd seen other prisoners invent. We printed 2,000 copies of this book a few years ago. It sold out. We printed another 1,500 copies. Now we're chipping away at those. Some things we've printed 5 times over. Other things we print 1,000 copies of, and that's it. This is a booklet that I wrote, an essay that we've reprinted about 5 or 6 times now, about 500 copies each time. I'm kind of tired of reprinting it, but you never know. Might do it again. We also distribute some work by other publishers who are typically people we've collaborated with in the past, people whose work we really admire and we want to support what they do. Sometimes we barter with other publishers. Generally, we spend about $2,500 to $3,000 a year buying the work of other publishers to resell through our web store. We don't take that work to book fairs. It's confusing enough to explain how we have 4 different presses run by 2 people, to try to also explain like why another book was not published by us but is on our table. But we do sell these things through our web store. Typically, we pay for people's work up front. We don't work on consignment. Basically, we do things the way that we like to be treated ourselves, not having to ask people like, did you sell any books? You know, it's been like 3 months, you know, can I get that $18 that you owe me for the 2 books you sold? So we don't do that. We pay people right away, and it's a lot easier on the accounting. A lot of stores try out like 6 or 7 or 10 copies of one of our books at a time. That's typically what we do with other publishers. We'll buy like 6 to 10 copies of each book we're interested in, and if it sells out, we keep reordering until it's no longer interesting or the book goes out of print. And often we might sell 60 or 70 copies of someone's book, which for us, like if a store sells 60 copies of something, that's really great. But it does mean that we probably restocked the book, 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 times to sell those 60 or 70 copies. We probably typically have about 25 or more publications in our web store at any given time that were made by someone who is not us, and then maybe 75 books that different titles that we were responsible for in some way. We're not looking to like endlessly grow and become enormous distributors of other people's work. We're not looking to keep everything we've ever made in print forever. Sometimes we get tired of our titles and just want to keep it moving. Everything is sort of kept in a certain balance. We're not looking to like exponentially increase the number of copies we print of any one thing. If something is appealing to people and we run out of them and it's still interesting to us, we reprint it. Otherwise, that's that. The other thing we do that I think is a really useful model to consider is bartering with other publishers and selling each other's work. I'll just kind of quickly end on this note. So for example, this Toxic Shock Records history book that Fluke published is a $20 book. Our book, Prisoner's Inventions, is a $20 book. And we said, hey, this is a book we would like to carry. Is Prisoner's Inventions a book that you, Matthew Thompson, would like to carry? Matthew said yes. So we said, okay, let's just swap 10 copies of our books. And it took us a long time to list Toxic Shock in our store, so that was slow on our end. But before we sold out of his book, Matthew sold out of Prisoner's Inventions. So we could barter again, but we're not quite ready to get more copies yet. So Matthew just bought 10 copies at wholesale to continue selling it. When we run out of the Toxic Shock books, if he needs more of our book, then we could just barter again. And when we sell each other's books, through a barter exchange, then we just keep the money when we sell his book because he's already been paid in books with our book. A lot of publishers, who maintain web stores don't sell anyone else's work but their own. We find it helpful to sell other people's work because sometimes people are primarily coming to our web store to buy something that we didn't make. And then it's like a happy accident that they find something that we made. They're like, oh, like they made something that's actually kind of interesting too. I will add that to my order. So sometimes we're not the primary reason that people come to our own web store. It occasionally could be for a distributed title that maybe other people have run out of. I think that's mostly what I wanted to try to cover in super short period of time, but I can stick around for questions too. Thanks.
Super, thanks, Marc. Joe, did you want to chime in with any questions for Marc, or should we move on to Meia? Meia, sorry.
I love what Marc said at the end. I didn't have a question because I feel like it's fabulous, but I wanted to double down on that we did the same thing. We would trade books with other publishers, and because we did that, literally hundreds of stores began relationships with us because we were a place to order those titles. And then when we had titles that were appropriate for those stores, they ordered those as well. So that's like huge strategy when you're starting out.
I should add real quick that we don't offer other publishers' books at wholesale to stores, but often stores will order our things and say like, hey, I noticed that you don't offer Toxic Shock, Fluke's book at wholesale. Like, is there a way to get copies of that? And we'll just direct that store to the publisher. And that happens all the time with things that we distribute that other stores find they want as well. And I think people do that as well too. Who helps with the web store design and maintenance? Brett and I do all of that. I do all the shipping. Every now and then we'll pay someone like on a per project kind of basis to help with things. We do pay designers. We print some things ourselves on a risograph. We print other things working with printers. We work with a bindery. But most of what we do, everything is inventoried either in a storage unit or my basement or my attic or Brett's house. Again, like we sort of try to keep this scale and balance with other things that take up time and space and our sources of income in our lives, because this can't be the only one of those things.
Cool. All right, let's pass the mic to Meia.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here, and it's an honor to join. My mind is sort of blown right now. So my name's Meia. I say it rhymes with Princess Leia because it's hard to pronounce, Meia Leia. I am the founder of Poetose, whose mission is to spread the love and create beautiful things and contribute to the landscape of Boston and beyond. So we publish short work digitally as well as longer form chapbooks and books in print, and sell bookish items like notebooks. So I have 3 notebooks at the moment of animals engaged in literary activities, as well as book earrings. So talking about the print side, we basically have my own 2 books that I published many years ago, and then I wanted to get some life experience, be a librarian. But now I'm coming back to Poetose and a poetry chapbook and a poetry book in the works to be published within the next months. So my own 2 books are published through Ingram Spark, but I actually want to change that and transition to offset print runs because of the quality. And Poetose is not a nonprofit. So I want it to have a sustainable business model and to be able to pay authors fairly, to be able to take risks on emerging writers, on poets, on work that might not be as commercial. So that definitely does mean looking at costs closely, the cut that distributors would take plus the storage fees adds up. So I'm just interested in general in seeing what's possible in in-house and then in collaboration with other entities. And then historically, also as a smaller operation, when I previously investigated, it was hard to find any distributor that would just take on my books, even though I think at least they are professionally published, in that I hired an editor, I hired a cover illustrator, got a start Parikh review for one of them. So I'm not sure all the answers, and I'm still definitely learning, but open to the ideas. So thanks, everybody.
Congrats on the Kirkus star. That's a big deal.
Oh, thanks. That was like many, many years ago, but
Nobody needs the date after it. It's still a big deal. Joe, anything you wanted to point out or ask about Meia's?
Yeah. So are you looking, would your books work well with fiction publishers? I'm seeing a little bit of that in the chat. Like, who would your ideal partner or publishers, what would they be doing and looking like?
so I think, yes, fiction. I'm actually thinking children's books and poetry, like chapbook, sort of applying artist book concepts to books, if that makes sense. I'm not sure because I'm still working on the production side more and want to just get that nailed down first to create the beautiful product. And then, yeah, it's hard to know because I am a for-profit, but I want to keep the options open. So Poetose is a neologism of poetry plus prose with an emphasis on the toes is the idea. So wanting to publish both, like traditionally at least not as commercial work like poetry, but also more higher selling like genre fiction like romance. So not quite sure. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
It's a process and you're exploring, and well, I guess we're all part of the process. I think looking at the time, we should pass the mic to Tamara.
Hi, I am Tamara of Taevo Publishing. We are a growing indie traditional publishing house. It's Black owned and woman owned. First and foremost, can y'all hear me okay? Joe nod. There we go. Yeah. I want to say hi to my fellow innovators. I love the IBPA. The reason I was able to meet Joe Biel and be around women like Suhani and Ambika. I also see Betsy Miller of Thinking Press in the chat. Hi. You guys, there are organizations that see the problems that are out there and they see the gaps and they know that we're all on these little islands trying to fix it. And they're trying to bring us together. So that's the first thing I want to say is thank you, because without that program, I wouldn't have even been able to meet these wonderful ladies. So how I'm approaching distribution, I am approaching it very modestly. I currently distribute out of my office. When you get into traditional publishing, you learn very quickly that, especially when you're wearing all the hats, if you don't sell, you don't make money. It's just that simple. The books are not going to sell themselves. So what I found is what I thought was this side hustle of selling other people's books that Taevo didn't publish, it was bringing in money. But part of me felt a little ashamed of it. I used to shy away from that because I thought it didn't make me a real publisher, you know? It made me feel, it was like I'm putting more effort into selling someone else's books over my own authors. But I was told by Joe Biel's vice president, shout out to Ellie, that basically in so many words, it's okay to be a hype woman for other publishers. Because at the end of the day, we're all readers who love books and we love to sell stories. And I love to sell great stories to hungry readers. And so a lot of what I was doing on the distribution end was for sure like underground. I'm dealing with indie bookstores who do not know what Edelweiss is, first of all. I'm dealing with like mobile bookstores that are like Black owned and indie owned. And they're like, I'm doing this out of my car, girl, until I can get a bookshop somewhere. I'm talking to those people who are saying, well, and I'm asking them, well, why are you selling Colleen Hoover? Or not to name drop certain people, but I'm name dropping the popular authors because they felt compelled to sell them so that they can keep up and stay in the game. And I was explaining to them, no, you don't need to do what the retailers are doing. You need to stand out. You need to start spotlighting the local authors and the indie ones and the niche authors, these niche weird titles that don't make it into bookstores. That's your superpower. But when you ask them to do that and they do it, where's the support for them? And that was where I was seeing the gaps with regard to what can a distribution co-op actually do? So for me, I can honestly say, like, learning from Suhani and Ambika, I'm not going to tell you ladies' horror story, but that horror story you shared with us at PubU was, it made me say to a colleague, what are we even doing this for? I'm going to sell X amount of books and do all of this work and put all of this time and all of this effort into this for what? Because everywhere I go, I hear either good stories about distribution or absolute horror stories. And most of the horror stories end with someone saying, it was better for me just to do it on my own. It was better for me just to go back and do it. And it had me dejected for a while. And then I remembered, wait a minute, there are other table shakers. There are other people out there who think the same way. And so that's why I'm so glad you guys shared this information, because one of the questions that was asked in the chat was, how do you find like-minded publishers? Well, in my case, the reason I joined IBPA was I was looking for other Black-owned publishing houses that were traditional. Couldn't find them wherever I was going, but I was still trying. Well, it was seeing the top 20 finalists of the innovators that opened that door where I could start those conversations with the people that were like-minded. And then it was going to the conventions and then going to the event where I was able to really set that connection and start putting, deciding. And we decided, you know what, it is time for us to have a collaborative effort to start putting our works out there, but to support each other. And so a lot of the ideas that Marc and Joe were sharing, especially with regard to like book bartering, selling each other's books, know what each other's books are. That's what it kind of starts with, building your own little database of what your people are doing, what they've got coming out, and being willing to actively sell it. People talk about POD, and I read Joe Biel's book, and I have to say, the very beginning, when he talks about how, like, if you bought this off of Amazon, you actually could have gotten for cheaper if you bought it from our website. That was golden, because immediately the day after, I took all of our books off of Amazon. And I said, no, we're going to go full throttle, and we're going to go only through our website, because coming into this, it feels like sometimes the big guys have us by the chokehold. And I don't want to feel that way anymore. And I want to help other people not feel that way. So some of the successes and weaknesses I think of this model is I'm definitely sending things out. I'm doing what I enjoy. I love shipping books and forming relationships, especially with indie stores, and connecting them with the books that aren't even produced by us. I think with us small indie presses, one of the weaknesses that we have to face is, how do you weigh that tipping point of time? You can't do everything, because publishing itself is already a big job. So then when you switch over into distribution, nobody's here to crap on distributors. We know they have a hard job. We know a lot goes into it. So no one's here to talk bad about them. It's more so about just pointing out, like, hey, we hear some creaks, and I think there's some rusty gears that might need to be worked on. And so it's more so about, well, how do we properly scale? And at what point do you weigh that tipping point of, all right, I need to definitely get a staffed warehouse going here versus doing this out of my office. Finally, honestly, the reason I'm interested in a potential distribution co-op is that it shows collaboration. It shows a solution to a problem, for a pain point that every single one of us has been facing for decades. And I think that's the main thing that got me, is like, everyone is sharing these same pain points, and we're coming together and we're sharing the information that we have. Like, just listening to Joe and and Marc talk has been mind-blowing. And so the vibe that I get from an endeavor such as this one is that everyone has to work together in order for it to work. One person at the top's not going to just benefit. There are so many
Cool.
local indie. Oh, sorry, I'm done.
No, it's all good. We just want to make sure we have time for questions. I know that some of you need to go because we hit the 11 o'clock hour, but we are going to record through the end of the Q&A, and then we'll switch into sort of like community chat time. But I do want to make sure we get time for questions. The thing that just popped through the chat is that 3 of you, at least, are not selling on Amazon directly. There may be, you know, the secondary market that has the books on Amazon, but you're not selling to Amazon. Joe, I know you spoke about this at our recent conference. Anybody want to explain why people are like, what? That's where people find us. So what do you think?
I mean, the
As a
short
business
answer
decision.
is it's like Tamara said, like you only have so much time in a day. Would you rather support the little stores that are gonna give you the same amount of love, or would you rather, like, who's gonna worry about the global corporations? You know, like that's kind of what it came down to for us.
Cool. Question, Ambika, do you think in the chat you could pop in the list of library wholesalers that you rattled off the top of your head? A couple of people have asked for that. And then can somebody please explain a library jobber? There was confusion about what that is as opposed to a wholesaler.
A jobber is more like a passive fulfillment channel. So it's they have orders, they sort out which orders go to which publishers, and then they fulfill those to the libraries. Whereas like a wholesaler is more thorough, like they'll have inventory and, you know, they do a mild amount of marketing.
So a jobber is like a middle person. That's hired by the publisher, or that's hired by the library?
Hired by the library. They would say, here are all the books we want, go get them. And then they bring them back.
Ah, cool. And then Suzanne had a question about marketing to libraries. Joe, you put a pretty good response to that. We had a question about sort of the principles of organizing a co-op. There's something called the Rochdale principles. I'm not aware of it, but Echo popped that into the chat. So I don't know, are folks familiar? Are from our presenters, are you familiar with the Rochdale principles of co-op stuff?
Yes. Yes.
Can you summarize it for?
Oh, I didn't know.
most of us?
I thought you were just waiting for everyone to give like a vote.
No, that's cool. I mean, I'm going to pop that link in the chat again. So if people are curious, you can go there. I don't know if it was like the organizing principle behind what y'all were doing. We had a question about returns and how it sounds like, Marc, you explained that you know, you're just buying up front from the other publishers that you're doing, but when you're how are y'all handle returns? I know, Joe, you do very few returns, but sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be, well, I guess you can sell non-returnably, but it's going to dramatically reduce your orders to sell non-returnably. So really the best thing you can do is give people the right quantities of the right titles at the right time. You know, that's been really, that cut our returns by 90%, you know, which is, so you always, and people have always said that like we could sell more if we had more returns, but in the end, we're at a good, pretty much the right economy for our scale.
And returns are only bookstores, right? Like when you're selling to skate shops or whatever, they're not, are they returning?
Correct. Most of anything that's a non-bookstore channel, they don't have the expectation of returns, but the big returns are from the wholesalers. So your Ingram, your Baker and Taylor, those are usually the ones that have the most brutal amount of returns. And then sometimes, you know, you'll have a weird incident sometimes where they get the book and they're like, this is really not really what we thought. Is there any way we could return them? And so you'll occasionally have odd cases like that. A lot of times what you'll see with a library is they will send copies to libraries, and then the libraries will ship them back, and then those will appear as returns sometimes. But the real problem is that bookstores have sort of been acculturated to believe that they, and it makes sense to a certain degree, that a bookstore will take a chance on more books because they can return it if it doesn't sell, and this is politically complicated, but in essence, at its core, it does make sense.
I mean, it's a lower risk for the bookstore, but it's a higher risk for the publisher, I guess.
Right, but you benefit because you're going to be in more stores. So it's really just about making sure your books are going to the right stores.
Right, and controlling the size of the orders.
Yeah, I think that note about the right, however you define the right stores, I think is really critical to me. So that, and when stores want to create a wholesale account with us, I mean, we encourage them. It's like, if you want to try 2 copies of a title, that's fine. Like, we have no minimum, order. Nobody really I mean, we ask people to buy things up front unless they really insist on consignment, and it's a store that we really want to work with and trust to actually pay us. Yeah, I think when it's like, if you know that the store is a really good fit for your work and you discourage them from, I mean, I recently, we bought some books from the author publisher Lloyd Kahn, and there was one title that we thought would work really well for us, and Lloyd just outright told us, like, oh, I wouldn't get that one. Like, that's not a good selling title. Like, you should get any of the other titles instead. And he was kind of right. So we changed our order for the one book and got more of another book. We wanted to support him. Like, it wasn't critical that it be that title. And we've done that with people, though. They'll want too many copies of something that we think might not be the best fit. We'd rather that our work be successful for stores and not clogging their shelves. And also that the work just doesn't need to be in every single store. Like, we don't need to have our books in every store in Chicago where I live. We can have our work in 5 stores in Chicago that we think are really, really perfect for what we do, and that can easily sell our work, and where it's not just kind of piling up and gathering dust and all that stuff. So
cool. Joe, you had said that you have your catalog on Edelweiss, and I'm wondering, are your sales reps customizing or notating the catalog for specific customers, or is it just sort of more like a passive thing?
Fantastic question, Lee. Yes, they do that. And yes, and yeah, in some cases, it is literally saying to the store, I would pass on this title. And in other cases, it's saying, you should buy 6 of this title. And, a good salesperson is they're going to steer people away from the wrong books. They're going to steer, but the markup on Edelweiss, the real value of it is for them to add anecdotes that the store would pass along when they're talking about the book that they haven't read to a customer, because they can't read all the books. But they can say, oh, this had, has this weird backstory to it. And that is a much better value add than a big review or a big blurb, because, the customers aren't skeptical of backstory in the same way.
That's cool. Is it, I didn't know that Edelweiss could do that. So I love learning that. Thank you. Marc, you were talking about that you have books from other publishers on your website where you're selling books. How is customer demand for those books happening? Are those other publishers sending customers to your website?
Sometimes they'll do that. We'll promote we don't bring those books to fairs, but we will promote them on Instagram and in the new. We send out. We do have a big email list, so we will promote those books that we distribute by other people in our mailing list emails. Often it's really helpful to have those titles, because we're not making a new book every month, right, or every other month necessarily, or sometimes not even every 3rd month. So having some new things that we're distributing by other people also gives us something to talk about. Like when we send out a newsletter, like, hey, in addition to this thing that we're going to try to sell you again, here are like 3 new things that we just started carrying by other people. But yeah, people will, other publishers will promote the fact that we have their work. Sometimes it's another publisher, like an example, we were in Vienna at the Vienna Art Book Fair, which had it not been funded by, our travel been funded by the organizer, would have been economically terrible. But one of the ways we addressed that was to barter with some other publishers. So then, when we're bringing a book from Germany back to the US and selling it through our web store, that German publisher can say, hey, like you can get our book in the US from Half Letter Press and not pay exorbitant European shipping. So people send people to us. We sell out of things that we've published, and we'll tell people, hey, we're out of it, but Printed Matter still has it. So that happens also. Yeah.
That's cool. Suhani and Ambika, how did you figure out the relevant wholesalers? You were saying that you know that you're going for schools and school libraries. How did you figure that out?
So it really started with Follett, actually. And Ambika, you can speak to your experience initially working with them through Yali Books. And why don't you start there?
So I think, point number 8 in Joe Biel's list of nine things was meaningful ways to market your books. And I think if your book has demand, these companies come to you. So that's what happened with Follett. They had an order of a book that they were waiting to place. They said, we don't have you as a vendor of record. Will you please sign this paperwork so we can purchase these books from you? And I was like, wow, I didn't know you could do that. So that was very exciting when they came to us. And then we slowly learned that, okay, this is one of many. So then we went on, IBPA has a list, for example, of wholesalers. There are lists on the internet that you can find. And then we said, oh, Follett is only one of many. So we were like, okay, if we can work with one, we can definitely go to the other and say, hey, we can work with you too, because it's not exclusive. So we started looking at these lists, and then we started emailing them. If you work with one, you can go to the next one and say, I work with this one. Would you like to work with us? And that's really how we sent out the email. We were like, we've been working with this wholesaler. We want to work with you. And they immediately jump on board because they're all competing for the same market.
And they also see the history of sales that have been coming in for the book.
They do see the history of sales.
Because for both Yali Books and MFB, they were able to see a long history of sales for all our titles. And so the moment they saw that, they were really excited to set up calls. And I think the one thing we discovered is while initially with Follett, Ambika had a very passive relationship with them where the orders came in, she fulfilled them, and it kind of ended there. Now what we're trying to do is see how it works out to do the bulk of our marketing through them. And so, and really work closely with them to target the markets even more closely. And so that's something we're experimenting with starting this year. So we're excited to see how that plays out.
Cool. Joe, I know that you have it's thousands of stores that are your customers for your books, right? So do you have a system that you have multiple salespeople? So do you have a system for sharing information about a particular store among your sales team? Like, oh, they really like sports books or whatever. Like, how did you organize that?
Yeah, so we have a couple different ways of doing that. So we work with a little over we're about to cross 14, we might have crossed 14,000 stores. So data sorting is really critical. So we have tagging. So we'll have a way to say they sell books on these topics. So a bookstore is pretty general interest, but a hardware store is not going to sell witchcraft books, for example. Or if they are, it's probably a pretty cool hardware store. But, so you want to think about it that way of what are they interested in, And then, there's some kind of drilling down, like you can't diminish everybody to statistics and tags, but it's a good start. And then our system looks at what they ordered in the past, and then it figures out books where the titles are comped to each other, meaning it's a book that the same person would buy. And then it says, hey, these are books that should go to that store because they ordered these other ones. And so we're just making use essentially this is how the entire industry has always worked, but they don't have those final steps of saying, these are the stores that it's worth presenting these books to because they bought this other book. They look at it from trying to make that the store's problem by saying, here are books that we compare this book to. Please notice that and figure out that you should order this book, and
Is
it's
that integrated into your WorkingLit system?
Yeah, it is. And to add on to what Ambika said, it's really, when I was running Microcosm out of my bedroom, I got purchase orders from Brodart, which is a library jobber, and it was it's hard to put it into words. It's very touching because you do this and then these people find you because somebody went into their local library and asked for your book, and that's just so cool. And so honestly, yeah, it's like essentially it's not about you reaching out to them, it's about them wanting what you're doing, So and a lot of it, and so awareness, like it's just like making cool stuff and having people know that it exists.
Making cool stuff and having people know it exists feels like perhaps the perfect line to end on. I'm going to turn off the recording, and I just want to thank everyone for watching. If you are here live, hang out with us. We're going to have about 12 more minutes of conversation. I want to say a big thank you to Joe, to Suhani, Ambika, Marc, Meia, and Tamara for being here and for sharing with us. And for everyone watching, we really appreciate your being part of this event today. So thank you, and let me find the off.